On your journey through life, you are the hero. There are times, however, when it is beneficial to have an advisor to guide you along your path. Welcome to the Smart Money Simplified podcast with Brent Mekosh, certified financial planner, certified investment management analyst, and co-founder of MP Advisors LLC. In this podcast, Brent discusses some of the most important and interesting topics of the day as they relate to finance, the economy, and beyond. Now, on to the show.
Hello and welcome to Smart Money Simplified with Brent Mekosh. Brent, how are you?
I'm doing excellent. I'm joining you from what feels like the edge of nowhere, and I'm hoping that does not impact our audio quality. We're not doing video today because I'm actually down about an hour and 15 or 20 minutes northeast of Cabo on Los Palmos, which is in the Mexican Baja Peninsula. And I've had a little bit of spotty Wi-Fi down here, but we definitely want to have this conversation, and hopefully we can get it done uninterrupted. How you doing today, Eric?
Yeah, I'm jealous. Absolutely, really jealous. So
really good. I'm not gonna lie to you. It's been wonderful being down here. We're down here.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I am going to step out of the way so we can save this bandwidth in this conversation for you and your guest. You have a guest on the show. Who'd you bring on, and what are you guys talking about?
I do. I have Mark Herbert on, and Mark I met very recently. Actually, we connected through LinkedIn, and both of us really appreciate and love that platform. And we're able. He's in Phoenix part of the year, up in Oregon for part of the year, and we're able to meet in person for a cup of coffee, and had a great conversation. And I was just thinking to myself, I got to get him on with Eric and I, because he's definitely an expert in terms of leadership, in terms of management, in terms of coming into organizations, and it might be a polite way to say, cleaning up some things maybe that need to be cleaning up. But I'm really excited about this conversation. And Mark, I'm going to turn it over to you right now, and just tell us a little bit about yourself and your history and how you got to where you are today.
Okay, thanks, Brent. Very kind. Yeah, I oftentimes refer to myself as a recovering human resources professional. I actually started in that field back when they called it personnel. And I have long believed that the relationship between employers and employees has been fraught with opportunities for improvement. And so I spent the early part of my career in mining and high technology and human resources roles. I then went out into consulting. Since then, I've worked with anything from Fortune 100s to not-for-profits, all of them around a pretty single theme. And that is the relationship between employer and employed. And frankly, a lot, Brent, about what we now refer to as employee engagement. Back when I was first experimenting around with that, they didn't have a name for it, but that has definitely become my passion and my driving force, and kind of what gets me up in the morning every day.
Yeah, and I love this topic because one of the things that Eric and I have touched on in the past, as we've had our discussions together, is I feel like, and a mutual friend of ours, we talked about trust in a lot of institutions has diminished a little bit. How do we engage employees and really get them brought into the mission? And do you think it's actually getting better or worse in the business world right now than it has been in the past, that level of engagement?
Quite frankly, unfortunately, Brent, it's gotten worse. If we just look at trust as a barometer, one of the things that you and I had a chance to chat about is something called the Edelman Trust Barometer, which is research has been done for 26 years by the Edelman Group, and they have looked at trust in four major institutions: non-government organizations, government, the media, and business leadership. And the numbers of trust have consistently gone down. Business leaders occupy the top position, but you can't kind of fall off the floor. That's with about 51% trust. I will say that one of the things that was very, very disappointing to me is I'm a little bit of an optimist. And during COVID, one of the things that happened is we all got turned on our head, and we had to look and we had to do work differently. And so you saw people working remotely, and you saw work being organized differently and everything. And you actually saw us be able to do that pretty successfully. And I was hoping that was going to be a wake-up call for employers that says, you don't have to watch people to know that they're working. If you have a clear mission, if you provide clear expectations, if you give and receive trust, you can actually still run a very successful enterprise. And what's been very, very disappointing, Brent, is to watch all of a sudden everybody wanting to slam the brakes on that now. And saying, even though for 3 years we managed to do things and move along and get the work done, all of a sudden we want everybody back in the office where we can watch you again. And watching the reaction to that from employees, they're angry and they're hurt. And I don't blame them. And that has not contributed to either employee engagement or to the trust relationship.
You bring up an interesting point that I've talked a lot about with people is obviously during COVID, everyone was sent home. And I think that some of that, there can be a negative of that is that sometimes that corporate culture can be lost. There's sort of incidental meetings at the water cooler that you can get in large organizations. What I would like to see, and I'm curious your thoughts on this, is what's the happy medium between giving people the freedom to, because I'm of the belief that provided you do great work, I don't care where and how you do it. Let's just get this great work done. But how do you do that in a way that maintains the culture that you get just by interactions every single day?
Well, that's a great question, Brent. I think the answer is it's a hybrid model. I mean, there are occasions where we need to see each other. We need to be in person. There's a tremendous benefit from that. What we used to call the water cooler conversation. The conversation in the hallway. There really is not a substitute for that, of being face to face with people and having shared experiences. But the key is making it a hybrid, and the key is recognizing with people saying, okay, there's going to be a certain amount of face time that we need from you, but we're going to talk about why, and we're going to have a purpose around it. And we're going to talk about it in an adult kind of a way about, what we're trying to achieve with that. But we're going to look at the fact and say that we're going to create balance around that as well. It's not an all or nothing that says, you have to be here 40, 45 hours a week where I can see you in order to know that you're working. And I think it can vary by person. I think it can vary by function. But I think when you have that hybrid relationship, and one of the things that it goes to the whole why are you requiring me to be here? Is this a power play on your part, or is there actually some level of business corporate legitimacy as to why you need to see me in person, and I need to be in an in-person arrangement, and have that conversation with people.
Now, most of the organizations that you've been engaged with, do you find that from a management standpoint, particularly now that we're heading in this transition back into the way things were, is it a power play to want to get people back in the office, or are they just not expressing to employees, effectively communicating why that is important?
I think there's some of both, Brent. I think in a lot of cases there is something that's been missed in terms of that human interaction. But I think it's like a lot of things. A lot of times, those of us in the C-suite, we see things very, very clearly from the 20,000 foot perspective. This is our mission. These are the things. We get all the things that we're doing and why we do them. What we forget is that there's a shorthand that we have with each other that everybody hasn't been read in. All as they see is what in some cases look to them like very arbitrary and capricious behaviors. The other thing is that there's kind of a executive privilege, so to speak,
right,
that we kind of take it for granted that we're the leaders. We shouldn't have to explain ourselves to employees. Well, I hate to tell people, but that ship has sailed. With the new generations, they are going to look for and say to you, and it's not just about coming out, but why should I engage with you? Okay, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm an intrapreneur. I'm going to rent my talents and my abilities to the highest bidder. Tell me why it should be you. What is it you're going to provide for me in an environment as to why I should come in? What are you doing that is compelling? What are you going to do that's going to make the world a better place, or do something more meaningful, or help me as to why I should invest my time and energy with you? And I don't think they're wrong. And the upside of that is when organizations do embrace that, Brent, they achieve things on the more traditional, whatever you want to call them, KPI or metrics, that are numbers that the average investor would weep for.
Yeah. Yeah. You suggested during our conversation about a week or so ago that I read Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why. Yep. And fantastic. I've got about literally 15 pages left. It will be done today. But do you feel like there's so many examples in this book of large corporations that started with a very clear vision of why they were in business and what they were bringing to the marketplace, that got diluted or went away altogether? Do you think that we're in a world where larger enterprises that you are around, are we less clearly articulating the why we are in business, or is this just always been the state of events in the business world?
I think business has gotten bigger. It's gotten more complex. You have international enterprises, you have time zone differences, and also I think that adds a lot of complexity to it. But one of the other things that as a kind of I'm a little bit of a data nerd is I don't know if you're familiar with Dunbar's number.
I've heard the term, but I don't know what it is.
Dunbar was a social scientist that said that contrary to Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn, for most of us, the highest number of people that you can have any kind of a meaningful exchange or meaningful relationship with is 150 people.
Okay.
And so in a lot of cases, that's what organizations were built around. One of them is very common is when you see the way that the military is put together. They are in those numbers because when you're at that size, you can still have a pretty intimate relationship with people. And so that's a part of it as enterprise get bigger. The other thing that happened, unfortunately, is during the Industrial Revolution, is the premise from a guy named Frederick W. Taylor, who was an industrial engineer, is people don't need to know why. People just need to do what they're told. Is that what we need to do? The whole premise of scientific management is take work and dumb it down into very, very small pieces that are repeatable and can be replicated over and over and over again and don't require any real training. And, that was the invention of white collar management. And that's still a premise that a lot of people, buy into, Brent, is managers manage and people do. And the problem is we are leaving a tremendous amount of intellectual energy on the cutting room floor because of that. Because that whole idea of, even, I still talk to executives, well, why do they need to know the why? What they just need to do is come in and do the work. And I ask them, how's that working for you?
Yeah, exactly. Why am I in the room? Why are you talking to me? That's the question.
Yeah. How are you doing at attracting talent? One of the other concepts that I talk a lot about is the concept of an employment brand. There are organizations out there that have a brilliant employment brand. And I want to be clear that your employment brand is not your product brand. Your employment brand is how your current employees and how your potential employees see you as an employer. And back in the day, if you were a Microsoft or you were an Apple or you were a Starbucks or you were some of those other companies, you were the coolest place in the world to work. I mean, if Apple showed up somewhere and put up we're hiring, you'd go in the morning at 5 a.m. and there'd be 10,000 people in a line waiting to apply. And that's part of that why. Their why is very, very clear. Their mission is very, very clear. And when you do those things and you do that, you don't have to waste your time on kind of breaking through some of the more pedestrian elements of trust and purpose and things like that, because people get it, because they're joining up with you. I shared with you, Brent, that one of the reasons we still live in Oregon, my wife is a horse person. Okay. And a number of years ago, she took me to an event with a guy named Monty Roberts. And Monty Roberts is the guy, he's one of the characters of which the very famous movie with Robert Redford, The Horse Whisperer, was based upon. Mm-hmm. And Monty Roberts developed a completely different way of training horses. For those of us from the Wild Wild West, you always heard people, we need to break this horse. And that's exactly what it meant. You needed to cause the horse to conform to you, to submit to your will. Well, Monty's model is a model that says you don't break the horse. Horses are a herd animal, and horses naturally want to join up with you. And I remember sitting there in the stands watching this guy training horses, and I thought, you know what? He's not just talking about horses. He's talking about people.
Yeah.
Instead of asking people to conform to your norm, give people a reason to join up with you and to share the values and to share your purpose. And that was very, very compelling to me. I mean, it really rocked my world in a profound way. That said, wow, what if organizations did that? And instead of being about compliance, we became about commitment. And that was a big premise of my first book that I wrote in 2008, which is actually called Moving from Managing Whole People, Moving from Compliance to Commitment.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, how do you, I guess, I'm very fortunate because the company I work with is Raymond James. I feel like we have an incredibly strong corporate culture. Everyone knows what it is. And because we haven't been through a lot of the big acquisitions that many other large financial firms have been through, people feel comfortable with their jobs and they're on the Kool-Aid generally. So I'm fortunate. I don't work in a toxic work environment. But if you've got, let's say you're small or even a mid-sized company where you can have, you're a founder, you're an entrepreneur, you've got 50 to 150 employees. First of all, how can you recognize that the culture is going bad? Because you might be so in the weeds of the numbers and providing your product or service, you don't see it. So I guess my first question is, how do you recognize when there's a shift, when things are not going well?
Well, one of the first things that happens, Brent, is when you start to see the meetings after the meetings is, you spend hours in meetings and you talk about, this is what we're going to do. This is the initiative. This is what everybody's going to do. And you come back 6 weeks later and nothing has happened.
Right.
Because that's a sign there that says that you're having conversations, but you're not achieving buy-in. The other thing is, do people ask questions and what do they talk about? A big thing, quite frankly, is this is an old management strategy, but I'm a big believer, wherever possible, is use something called MBWA, management by walking around. Go out and talk to people, see what's going out in your workforce. You don't undermine your inner layers of management, but you do go out and talk to people, and you get that sense of people, and you can tell. I can walk into an organization, Brent, and I got to tell you, probably within 20 minutes, I can get a pretty good sense of the culture and where it is.
And what are you looking for when you walk in the door?
First thing I walk into, how does the person at the front desk greet me? Do they look like I'm an annoyance? What is their interaction? Am I welcomed in? I look at the environment. I look at how people are interacting with each other. If everybody is heads down, doors are closed, and everything like that, and I get this sense of almost exhaustion on the part of that front person. That tells me this is an environment where they got problems already.
Right. And how do you, I guess, once you recognize that there's some issues, and I think it's like anything, you've got to work towards finding that ideal balance every single day. But what is the first way that you can address that?
The first way to address it is to own it, is to, and this is a very scary thing, to step up in front of people and say, I'm getting a sense that, we're not in harmony here. There are things going on. I like numbers. You like numbers. Do an assessment. Ask people straight out. It doesn't have to be terribly complicated to ask people about kind of some key things in terms of, how do you feel about your job? Do you come to work excited every day? Do you feel like you get to do your best work every day? Do you feel like you get to participate meaningfully in your work? Do you feel like what we do is meaningful and important? And have those conversations. Tell me about your relationship with your boss. There's a series of 6 questions that I always like to ask people whenever I'm talking to a group, right? And I ask the questions in a very, very specific way. And the first question that I try to answer for people and ask them is, what is your job? Okay, what is it that you do here? Okay, how do you fit into the bigger picture? The second question, go ahead.
These are I definitely want to dive into these. So Mark, if you're asking someone, what is your job? Are you looking for, here's my tasks, here's what I do every single day? Or are you looking for something deeper and more meaningful?
I'm looking for something deeper and more meaningful. What is the contribution that you make to the organization that is you? A great story, Brent, is Michael DeBakey was a very, very famous cardiovascular surgeon. He was one of the first people to do a heart transplant. He was also a brilliant leader. And there's this funny story about how a journalist went out there to interview him because he had heard about him, and he's like, this guy can't be who he is. I'm hearing this guy is he's a great doctor, he's a great leader, he's a great person, everything like that. And by 3 days into it, the journalist is just really, really frustrated because he can't get anybody to say anything negative about Dr. DeBakey and what they do. And so finally he's leaving. And as he's leaving, he notices that there's this elderly African-American gentleman that is very, very carefully using his dust mop to mop the halls of the building. And he says, here's my chance. So he goes up to this guy and he says, so what do you do here? And the gentleman very proudly props his mop up against the wall. And he says, Dr. DeBakey and I are saving lives together.
Wow, that's amazing.
Well, and a journalist says, say more about that. He says, now I get it. DeBakey's a doctor. He's got all these people on scripts. This guy's medicated. He's a custodian, and he thinks he's a surgeon. He says, well, what do you mean you save lives? And he said, one of the things that Dr. DeBakey shared with all of us that work here is one of the biggest reasons people die when they go into the healthcare setting has nothing to do with why they're in the hospital. It's because they get an infection, a secondary infection, because appropriate protocols weren't taken. So that will never happen here.
Well, Yeah. And the man's literally, in his mind, he's not, cleaning the floors. He's saving these people's lives almost.
That's exactly right. That's why, Brent, when the guy gets it at that level, at that profound level, that person understands the value proposition of the organization and what they bring to that value proposition. Try to imagine a situation as a business owner where you have 150 or 200 or 250,000 people who come in with that kind of alignment to your vision and mission every day.
Yeah, it's incredibly powerful, incredibly powerful. So let's move on. What's your second question?
How am I doing? How are you doing? Do you get feedback? Do you know whether or not you're doing good work? And because that's a big one for people, which leads into the third question. Does anybody care? If somebody is not rowing the boat, if somebody is not doing the work, does management acknowledge it? And only after you get to those first three questions, Brent, do you move on to the next three, which is, okay, who are we? What is our job? What is our why? Then the fourth question is, how are we doing? And then the fifth question is, how are we? And then the sixth question is what I call the equivalent of behavioral self-actualization, which is, how can I help? Where that person is embracing that. And when you actually start to have that conversation with people and you answer those three questions, the first three questions, you answer them well, and then you allow them to participate in those last three. It's a huge thing to actually have those conversations and to start with those very, very basic things. Because when I say to people, well, does everybody know what their job is? Oh, well, of course they do. They have job descriptions. We have KPIs. We have MBOs. We have all of these things. And I say, okay, well, let's have some fun. Let's go out there and just randomly walk around and ask people, who are our biggest customers? What is our biggest single source of revenue? What are the biggest challenges that we face? Those things. And I watch people get pretty chagrined, Brent, when people can't answer those questions. And I say, you know what? That's not their failure. That's a leadership failure.
Right. No, I agree with you 100% there, Mark. And I think that one of the challenges, and I feel this myself as well, even in my little shop, is I'm very fortunate. I've got great people working with me. And sometimes they're doing such good work on an ongoing basis that you're like, everything's great. And you fail to recognize that, you know what, there might be something more that they can bring to the table, or maybe there's something that they would do differently, which could completely change the entire environment and help us do even better work. So that, yeah, I think it all, to me, it seems like it boils down to a certain level of complacency and not wanting to maybe have some of those hard discussions, or just, you're on autopilot and you're going through your day and you're checking the boxes that you need to do, and you're not recognizing that there could be enormous growth opportunities. I mean, do you feel that can be the case in organizations?
It can, Brett. The other thing that I think is very, very important to remember is each person is a different person, and each person needs to be managed differently. There are people who the worst thing you can do is check in on them every day. They're like, why are you in my face?
Right.
I know what I'm doing. Give me the ball, coach. I'm fine. There are other people that need that level of reinforcement. And so the other thing that is a critical leadership management skill is learning what each of your direct reports need from you at a given time, and being there to meet them where they live and dialing that in. And I know that, that I could see people out there going to listen and roll their eyes and say, I'm not a therapist. No, you're not, but you are a coach. Okay. And you are a leader. And when you manage people kind of one at a time, and they feel like you were there for them and providing them, and the guidance that I give Brent may be very, very different than the guidance I would give Eric or the guidance I would give Jeff. And so tailoring your leadership style and your coaching style to the situation, to the person, is also a very, very difficult, but very, very, very powerful skill set to learn as a leader.
Yeah, along those lines, one of the things that I've heard throughout my entire professional career, and I have some belief in this, is that my dad used to say this to me growing up, and it always impacted me. He said, you know what? He said, when I go to work, he goes, it's a different stage. He said, whatever's bothering me at home, I don't take that to work, and I focus on what I need to do there. When I get home, it's a different stage. Whatever's bothering me at work, I don't bring it home, and I focus on what I'm doing here. And, I think increasingly, you have to recognize that the people that we're working with are whole people, and they've got issues going on at home. And I know, at least with my people, if it's something significant, I really want to know about it. but can we hit a point where there's too much sharing and too much of our personal lives is being brought into the professional workplace?
And the answer to that is yes, Brent. I remember coming up through personnel and HR, you are not your staff's therapist. You're not their parent. They are a functioning adult. And so there are boundaries. There are boundaries of what you can do for them is when you recognize that they are having an issue or something like that. You may not be the person to help them, but you can facilitate that by recognizing that and helping them get the resources that they need. I don't think that there's anything wrong with that as an employer. Let's be honest. The reason that we provide health benefits and things like that to our employees isn't out of some sense of nobility. It's because healthy employees come to work, okay, and they're productive and they don't miss days and they do better work. But by doing those things and having people feel like you actually care about them. But yes, there is definitely a balancing act. One of the things that I tell people a lot is I hire adults. I respect you too much to treat you as if you're a child. I will coach you and I will be supportive of you. I refuse to be codependent with you because codependency is the highest form of disrespect that I can pay to another high functioning adult. I'm going to parent you. I'm going to allow you to perform at less than your best. I'm going to allow you to not, meet my expectations and things like that. That's actually disrespectful behavior.
And where is that line?
When it gets to the point where they are not meeting the expectations, when it gets to the point where they become a drag on the team, it doesn't mean that you jettison them, but you have a conversation with them and you acknowledge it and you force them to acknowledge it. Okay, this is where we are. So let's talk about what we're going to do about this. I mean, I've had situations where I've worked with people who've gone through recovery from drug and alcohol addiction, things at home and everything like that. I mean, there are people that would probably say we were too invested. But when that person came out of the other end of the tunnel, Brent, and I had a high functioning employee, I felt pretty good about us as an organization, and I felt pretty good about them as an employee. And those employees go out and tell other employees at a time where I was really struggling. My employer had my six, as we talk about in the military. They had my back, and that means a lot to me. So when things get a little bit tough and maybe raises aren't as big as I would like them to be, and maybe bonuses aren't as big, I remember the fact that there was a time that rather than my employer dealing with me in a two-dimensional level, they didn't try to parent me, and they didn't swoop in, but at the same time, they actually had a conversation with me. And they actually provided some guidance and some support to me, because quite frankly, if we take a look at where we're at today, businesses and organizations, we're probably in the best position to deal with that of any of the infrastructure. If we had a manufacturing problem, I worked in manufacturing, we would put teams of people on it and spend millions of dollars fixing it. Well, guess what? I would submit that most businesses that the cost of the skills and the abilities of their employees is the biggest singular investment they make. So tweaking that and learning to do that better and learning to create an environment, a healthy environment for people where they can perform at their best, it's good business.
I would wholeheartedly agree with that. And is there, statistically anyway, does it vary by employee, or is there a minimum amount of time that a business owner should be looking at their people or speaking to them one-on-one and saying, hey, what's going on with you? And just doing that check-in.
I try to talk with people, I try to talk with people, at least check in with my direct reports probably at least once a week. Doesn't have to be long. Sometimes it's 5 minutes, sometimes it's 20 minutes, sometimes it's 30 minutes. I also try to spend as little time in my office as possible and as much time out there seeing what's going on and talking to people. And I look for things. When I see somebody that has historically been a really high performer and something's going on, I talk to them about it. And they may not be ready to talk to me right then, but I let them know, hey, what's going on? I'm seeing things here. I'm seeing, what's going on. And I'm not saying to you in a threatening way that, I'm going to pull out my stick and beat you. I'm saying to you, I'm not seeing the you that you have brought to the job historically. Is there something going on that we can help with?
Yeah. And and generally speaking, if you're not getting that response, like initially, at least those wheels are now in motion in that person's brain where they might be more comfortable next time to come back to you.
But also, Brent, I can be pretty clear where there comes a point where I remind people we're a business. Okay, there comes a point where if you are not working on addressing these issues and everything like that, it is not fair to the organization and to your colleagues for us to carry you for a sustained period when you are not addressing the things that are going on with you. So it's not a free pass that says, okay, you have these things going on with you, so we're just going to overlook the fact that you're mailing it in.
Right. And how long would you be willing to tolerate that kind of behavior? I guess it depends on the person in the job.
If it was not a chronic situation, like if I have somebody that is actually suffering from a life-threatening situation, I'm going to be a little bit more patient. But if it is a kind of a more behavioral thing, inside of 90 days, we're going to be having some pretty crucial conversations.
Got it. Let me ask you this. A focus of ours is working with businesses that are either looking for a financial buyer or a growth partner in 2 to 5 years. When you do have these mergers or acquisitions that take place, there can often be a big clash and contrast with cultures within now this new organization. Can you tell me a little bit about what some of your experience in those type of circumstances have been?
Yeah, a lot. Yeah, I see that a lot. We come in and it's very interesting. We go in and we buy a business, we have reasons for buying it, and then we immediately try to change their culture. We need to fix them. They need to learn our culture. What I tell people is my approach is there are reasons why you wanted to acquire this business. There are things that they brought to the party. There are things that you bring to the party. What I promote is instead of trying to assimilate everybody into your culture, build a new culture that actually represents the hybridization of the best post of both. And acknowledge the things that they bring to the culture, and acknowledge that change is hard for people. And when you do that, because culture is a living, breathing thing, and it's so interesting that you mentioned that, Brent. Where I see this, where people go in and they buy a business, and for example, I had a banker come to me a number of years ago, and she had clients that were buying these private clinics, and she said, one of the things that we found out that really is problematic is the doctors are actually the talent. Yeah. If they're not happy and they're not engaged, we just bought a business that goes from 60 to 0 in 90 days.
Yeah.
And we're not asking that question. We're not going in there, and asking that question in terms of how do we keep these people? What are the things is, are these people, they are not property. Okay. They actually, they have the right to leave. And so, and doing that and kind of looking at it and just recognizing is, yeah, we all have a culture, but culture should be evolutionary, not revolutionary, and just coming in everybody and announcing, okay, this is the way we're gonna do everything. My advice to people is be absolutely rigid about principle, but be flexible about process.
Right. And so in a case where if you are a business owner and you've got your target acquisition here, is that something that pre the purchase or before this merger occurs, how much time should you be spending thinking about that culture? Because perhaps maybe the culture of what you're looking to acquire is absolutely horrific, and that's why you're getting some discounted assets. Is that something that's how much time should you be spending ahead of time, I guess, trying to determine how hard it's going to be to make that fit work?
I'm probably biased, Brent, because I'm a social scientist. I come from that area. How much time would you spend looking at their technology? How much time would you spend looking at their balance sheet?
Right. Now, what if one of the reasons, Mark, you're buying the business is because the culture is so bad that that if you can give them that why, if you can give them that purpose for heading into in the marketplace every single day, you can turn this thing around. Let's say you've got a person that's an acquirer in that mode. How long would it take for the new company, I guess, the employees now of this combined entity to realize, hey, you know what, this is now a different world. We've got a team in place around us that is actually not just punching the clock, but is really trying to move the ball forward. Have you found that that's been successful?
Yes, in my experience, that takes somewhere between, if you're really, really lucky, you can do it in as soon as 12 months. It typically is going to be closer 18 to 24 months before you start to see really significant change. What I would also say is the easiest places to do it, Brent, is when an organization is in distress. One of the other things I say is never waste a good crisis.
Sure.
People are a lot more willing to pay attention when they're in crises and their job is on the line or they're at risk of losing their job than they are when they are basically boiling frogs, where there's that level of complacency.
Right. Now, I'm expanding on this because I have one specific situation that's on my mind here. When
Sure.
someone is coming in, does it help to hire a person like yourself where you've got a neutral third party that can come in and maybe better express both sides of the table to each other? Or is it really up to the actual acquiring party or business to set the stage at that point?
I actually use something a little bit different, Brent, because this is frankly the foundation of the work that I do.
Yeah.
And what I typically try to do is I come in as a third party, and what I tell people when I come into those situations, I have three roles. First of all, I have some expertise in systems and kind of human resources stuff and leadership stuff. Okay. Secondly, I'm a pretty good project manager in terms of figuring out what needs to be done. And third, I'm a facilitator. But what I have tried to do, and it's actually worked for me very successfully, is to put together a hybrid team of people from both the acquiring and the acquired organization, and try to create that as my core team, and to drive the changes through that core team of people representing both the acquiree and the acquired.
Okay. And how do you select the people to participate in that?
In some cases, it's self-nominated. In other cases, I sit down with the people, say, okay, you're the acquiree, or you're talking to people who sold you the business. You guys know who your informal leaders are. They may not be on an org chart. They may not have a title, but these are the people who are profoundly influential. Okay, if we can get these people on board and we can get these people to accept that this change is a positive and has upside, and to start to build that foundation of trust, we're going to be doing something with them rather than to them. It's going to take a little bit more time up front, but the difference is the culture chain is much more likely to be successful and sustainable than if you try to just drop it in from the top.
Got it. Now, Mark, let me ask you this. If someone wants to reach you or contact you for this level of help, how do they reach you?
Email mark@newparadigmsllc.com. I'm on LinkedIn. My website is www.newparadigmsllc.com. Any of those ways. Set up a flare.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, Mark, I know you've authored a couple books. Can you share those with us?
Yeah, my first book that I'm very, very proud of, as I mentioned, was called Managing Whole People: One Man's Journey. And it's kind of the exploration, the first 20 years of my career and all the mistakes I made. So it's a shortcut to people as to don't make these mistakes. Learn from me. There's an expression I heard that says a smart guy learns from experience, a brilliant guy learns from other people's experiences.
Very true.
We don't have to repeat the mistakes.
Yeah.
And then the most recent book that I just did with my partner in the UK that I'm very, very proud of is a book that we just published the end of October of last year, and it's called The Trust Paradigm. And the trust paradigm is about exactly that. It's about the fact that the new international currency is not Bitcoin. It's not commodities. The new currency that is going to drive organizations and drive organizational performance is trust. And organizations need to acknowledge the fact that we have done a poor job with trust, and we need to acknowledge that, and we need to address it. I have another book that is kind of a more for nerds that I wrote called Plan B, an alternative to Obamacare. As a human resources professional, back in the late 80s and 90s, we realized that healthcare was going to be a big deal, and so I spent a lot of time in creating different approaches to managing and delivering healthcare in corporate settings. But the two that are probably the most relevant to folks are the managing whole people and the trust paradigm.
Yeah, Trust Paradigm, as I've read that book, and that's how we connected. Actually, was through that book. Yeah. It's absolutely fantastic. I would suggest that any of our listeners pick up a copy of that and read it for sure. Well, Mark, I think this is a really important conversation. I know that when we had met last week and first were introduced to each other, you suggested again also this book, Start With Why, and it's been very interesting because I've been spending some time with that book in the last few days. And I do think I'm often guilty of focusing on what it is we do and how we do it, but you've really got to continually come back to that why. And at the end of the day, I think that if you're going to be leading people and leading an effective organization, if there's no why, it's kind of without a vision that people perish, you know.
Well, there's two others that I would suggest to you, Brent, if you like that, and you may have read them. Another book that I recommend to every leader or aspiring leader is The Speed of Trust by Stephen M. R. Covey.
Yep.
Where he does a brilliant job of describing trust. And another one is a book that is kind of esoteric, but it's a book by a guy named Ken Matejka. And the book is called Why This Horse Won't Drink.
Oh, I've not heard of that one. Okay. Interesting. Well, Mark, again, I really appreciate it. Thank you for taking some time out of your afternoon. Again, if anyone would like to reach out to Mark, reach out to me or him directly and see how he can help your organization. And again, I know you peeled some time off a busy day for you, and I really appreciate you spending some of it with us, Mark.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you both in person on this, Brent. You know, we're out there, and thanks again. This was a blast, and this, you know, let's you know what Jeff and I are trying to do is we're trying to teach organizations to do this trust thing one at a time.
And it's got to happen because I found that the people are feeling you've got to have purpose. And one of the most powerful books that I've read, of course, is Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl. Yep. And those that have purpose can endure pretty much anything, including Nazi concentration camps. And if you don't have that purpose, you're just sort of floating through the ether. And I do believe that that's one thing that in the organizations, in our families, and pretty much every social institution that we have, that purpose, that why is vitally important. And to the extent that we can all focus on doing that better in our own lives, I think the world becomes a lot better.
Couldn't agree more, Brent.
Mark and Brent, this has been fantastic. Mark, thank you for all that you shared. Just fantastic stuff. I mean, this is something that Brent and I have talked about in the past, just off the air, about corporations and trust and what's going on with employees and the difficulty all these companies are having. And a lot of it, I believe, is rooted in exactly what you're saying. So fantastic content. Brent, of course, thank you for facilitating this and bringing on another amazing guest. And our last thank you, of course, goes to you, listening audience. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to the Smart Money Simplified podcast with Brent Mekosh. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Brent comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. And we humbly ask that you share this podcast, rate it, and leave a review, as this actually helps others find the show. Again, thank you so much for listening today. For everyone at MP Advisors, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Smart Money Simplified Podcast. Have any questions about topics covered during the show? Visit www.smartmoneysimplified.com or give us a call at 602-255-0555. Don't forget to click the follow button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the hosts and/or guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Raymond James Financial Services Incorporated. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional financial advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service providers with any questions you may have regarding your individual situation. Securities are offered through Raymond James Financial Services Incorporated, member FINRA, and SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Raymond James Financial Services Advisors Incorporated, MP Advisors LLC, is not a broker/dealer and is independent of Raymond James Financial Services.